Now it is.
Okay, so it's recording?
Yeah.
Okay, so today we're going to pick up on meta-analysis. So we've discussed the descriptive methods of science, which are naturalistic and lab observation, case study and survey. And remember, when you do any of those kinds of studies, you're only allowed to describe. Then we talked about experiments. And an experiment has the advantage of being able to accomplish all four goals of science, test a hypothesis, which is a testable prediction, and then also to determine cause and effect. Make sure you understand that only when you do an experiment can you determine cause and effect. Okay? So only experiments determine cause and effect. And how do you know it was an experiment? Remember, it has to have certain what did I call them? Certain requirements, right? Requirements. So it has to have the requirement of having the groups from your sample, you divide into two groups. That has to be at random. And one of them has to be a control group, which means you don't do anything to them, right? So you have to have at least two groups, divided it into those groups from your sample at random. You have to have one of those groups have nothing happen to them. In other words, not get the independent variable, which is the control group, right? And you have to have the two variables, of course. All right, so what we're doing today is we're moving on. We talked about the problems of experimentation. And today we're moving on to explaining to you something called a meta-analysis. This is a statistical procedure that is relatively new in that back in my day, when I did my dissertation, I had to do what we called a lit review, which means we went into the literature and we looked at all the studies that had been done on the topic of interest to us. And what we did with that is we came to our own conclusion, kind of a subjective, obviously, right? Because I can't be objective. No one can be completely objective about what are the results of what we know about this topic. Well, now we do not have to be that subjective anymore. Now we can go through and take a whole bunch of different experiments, and we can see what is it that is the bottom line based on all these experiments. And it can be other kinds of studies too. So basically what we're doing is we go in, maybe there's 200 studies done on this topic. We pick maybe 50 that are really well done, where we feel like they really control for potential confounding variables and so forth. And we check to see what is the bottom line by doing this statistical procedure called a meta-analysis. It will allow us to determine how much of an effect does one of these variables have on the other. Not just does it, but how much of an effect does it have. So this is something we use to kind of come up with a bottom line of what we're doing. All right, so then the next thing I want to tell you about is called a ex post facto or quasi experiment. This is not an experiment, but it's very similar to it. We're going to still keep the terms independent and dependent variable, control and experimental groups. But what we're going to be doing does not qualify as an experiment for two reasons. There is no control group, one. Second reason, there's no random assignment of subjects into the groups. So it has all of the elements of an experiment, except for these two extremely important ones that actually make a study an experiment. Yes?
So we do the random assignment so that there's no bias, right?
We do the random assignment to control for what's called selection bias.
Right.
To assume that both groups in an experiment are about the same on anything that could lead to some change in the dependent variable, some difference in result.
And the control group is so that we have something to measure the experiment.
Compare it to.
So what's the purpose of even having a quasi-experiment then? Because those are so important.
Yeah, they are. Let me show you about some things we can only study this way. Okay? So, in a quasi-experiment, in fact, I'm going to come over here on the board and I'm going to draw an experiment, a very, very simple experiment like you're used to, and then a quasi-experiment. We'll look at those differences. If y'all can, if you need to move this, can you move it a little over this way? For me, thank you. Okay. So you're used to the usual experiment, right? Here's an experiment, and in an experiment we take a sample of people and we divide them into at least two groups, the experimental and the control group. And remember, this has to be done at random, through random assignment. Otherwise, we don't have an experiment. Now, in an experiment, usually we need to start by taking the dependent variable measure. So let's just go back once again to our hooked on phonics study. We tested the reading level of each of our students, and we came up with an average reading level to start with for the experimental and control groups. Then for a period of time, I can't remember if we used 1 or 2 months or whatever, we gave these kids the independent variable, hooked on phonics, and we did not give it to these children. At the end of the period, we went ahead and tested their reading level again. So this is an experiment. Let's note what we have here that's important. We have random assignment of subjects into groups. We have a control group. One group gets the independent variable and the other does not, right? Okay, now let's look at a quasi-experiment or ex post facto study. What we're doing here in an ex post facto or quasi-experiment, we take a sample of people. Once again, remember that when we're using these type of studies, experiments or even ex post facto studies, our samples tend to be smaller and less representative than when we're doing a survey or even a correlation, because we have to have these people available for us to manipulate. So we typically don't start off with very good samples. Then we're going to put these people into two groups. But check this out. We're not going to do it at random. We're going to do it based on something called a subjective variable. Subjective means something we pay attention to, that we just decide is important. And so we might start by giving the dependent variable to both groups. But also different from an experiment, we're going to give the independent variable to both groups. And then we test them again. So for example, my subjective variable could be something like boys versus girls. So I would put boys in this group and girls in this other group. I would give them both, all of them, a measure of reading level and see what the average was for the boys and what the average was for the girls. I then give both groups hooked on phonics, and I test their reading level again. I'm not able to say that the reason that the boys or the girls did better is because they're boys or girls, because I did not randomly assign them to be boys or girls. So all that I'm left saying is this group benefited more or that group benefited less or something like that. Now remember, a subjective variable is just something you decide to pay attention to. So it doesn't have to be boys or girls. It can be something else. Like in the hooked on phonics experiment, I might be thinking, well, what about monolingual kids? Kids who only speak one language versus bilingual kids. Which one of those groups tends to benefit more from hooked on phonics? And so basically what I have is I have the opportunity to check that out. But I cannot say it's because they're monolingual or because they're bilingual that they benefited more or less. I can just say it as a fact that that's what I saw in this study. So we're not determining cause and effect. Another thing I might be interested in, yet a different subjective variable, could be children who have been diagnosed with dyslexia, problems in their ability to read, and then children who do not have dyslexia, who have not been diagnosed with dyslexia, and see if one of those groups happen to benefit more than the other. But once again, I can't say this group didn't do as well because they had dyslexia, or this group did better because they had dyslexia. You understand? Because I didn't randomly assign them to this condition. It's because I didn't randomly assign them to the group that's either going to get one condition or another. So once again, what I have missing in action here. Here, I have random assignment, and in an ex post facto study, I assign people from my sample to the groups based on a subjective variable. There is no control group in an ex post facto study, and both groups get the independent variable, which is unheard of, right, in an experiment. You got it? Okay, so I'm going to turn off the overhead so that I can talk to you about correlations. We're going to have a chat about correlations, okay? Before I start telling you what they're about. Let me get this bright light out of my face. Okay. So we're gonna leave experiments, ex post facto studies, any of that stuff behind. As we discuss correlations, we're no longer going to talk about groups like experimental and control groups. We're no longer going to talk about things like independent and dependent variables. It's a brand new thing, okay? So it's a brand new thing, just all that other stuff just goes away. Now, the issue with correlations is that they tell us that two things are related. And we have two types of studies that we study that tell us that two things are related. One is an experiment, but an experiment specifically tells us that these things are related in such a way that one causes the other. A correlation also tells us that two things are related, but it has nothing to do with one of those things causing the other. So another word for correlation is an association or relationship. And when two things are correlated, it means that those two things are related, but in the case of a research on correlation, it tells us absolutely nothing about one of those things being related to the other. Okay? So the biggest mistake that people make with a correlation, the biggest threat to the use of correlation, is that people tend to misunderstand it. They think, oh, this means one of these things caused the other. Now, experimenters, researchers, they don't do that. We know, okay? And they know better than me because I'm not a research scientist specifically. But the people who don't understand it right, the general public, the media, politicians, and to be honest, it's not just about the people who don't understand it correctly. It's about the people who try to pass it on as meaning something it does not. So one of the things that's very, very important to me is that when you come out of my class, you are an educated consumer of scientific information. You already are among an elite group of people in the world who are attending college. And those who take a course in psychology, statistics, sociology, any of those sciences, they often teach research methods. But in my class, more than any, I really jump up and down about this topic. Now everybody should come out of an intro class in psychology, stats, anything like that. They should come out understanding that correlation doesn't mean causation. But for me, to me, you understanding that makes the difference between you being a wise consumer of scientific information versus an unwise consumer. So I really take that to heart as being very, very important. Okay? So I'm going to give you some examples today that will show you that there are politicians, media outlets, people like that are literally betting their money that you do not know the difference between an experiment and a correlation. And that you're going to fall for whatever it is they tell you, okay, based on how they present it, how they even emphasize, what they emphasize, right? So what if I told you that we have more teenage pregnancies since we have sex education in the schools? A lot of people are going to misinterpret that. But notice I could have also chosen to tell you that we have more we have more sex ed since we've had more teenage pregnancy. Now those two things are both implying something very different. The first being that sex ed is causing teenage pregnancy, and the second is that teenage pregnancy is apparently causing us to do more sex ed. Now I start with that example because years ago, a colleague of mine, we weren't even on this campus, it was that long ago. A colleague of mine came in to the office in the morning, and she was very upset. And I asked her what was wrong, and she told me she had been listening on the radio to Rush Limbaugh.
Oh my God.
Now, if you don't know who Rush Limbaugh was, he's a very right-wing, conservative personality who had a talk show and some other stuff, okay?
Does he not anymore?
I hope not. So anyway, what happened is that this is what Rush said, okay? He said, we have more teenage pregnancies since we have more sex ed in the schools. So my colleague was upset knowing that many people would hear that and misinterpret what they heard. The way Rush said it, without correcting the way he said it, obviously implies to uneducated people that the teenage pregnancies are being caused by the sex ed in the school. So what I want you to do when you hear something like this is think for yourself. For one thing, okay, for starters, sex ed in the schools is a very broad topic. In some schools, they teach you how to roll a condom onto a banana. In other schools, they teach you that if you touch it, you're going to go blind. Okay? So that's a pretty wide thing to put all sex ed into, right? Sex ed is very different in different places. So as you think about that, now that you know the difference between an experiment and a correlation, you're going to have to think like an educated person. First of all, what is this person trying to get me to believe? And what he said, could it be true? Now I'm going to tell you something else that is absolutely true. What he said is in fact true. And I'm going to tell you that we have more teenage pregnancies since we have less ozone. That is an absolutely true statement. Because over time, we have less ozone and more teenage pregnancies. Look back at the 1920s, 30s, 40s, 50s, and now, okay? So yeah, we have more teenage pregnancies now, but is it really the cause of sex ed?
No.
Could it possibly be that we're teaching sex ed because kids are coming up pregnant? I mean, that seems like a legitimate thing to me. So could it be that over time, our society has changed and has become more open-minded to sexuality and to the importance of children knowing certain things about sexuality, if only for health reasons, okay? So we don't know what the cause is, but the way he's saying it is making a bunch of educated people say, now there you go. You know, we from Texas, we sound the most uneducated of all, right? Except maybe Tennessee. But anyway, it's like, well, there you go, like sex ed, it's teaching them kids to go have sex, right? So we don't know, but here's the deal. You ask yourself, did they take a bunch of kids and randomly assign them to have sex ed or not? And I guarantee you the answer to that question is no. Because whether you have sex ed has everything to do with what state you live in, which school board you're under, and whether your mom or dad signs he can watch the vagina film or she can watch the penis film, okay? So it's not random. Even if they picked kids who, in a system that had pretty good sex ed, whatever that means, and they picked them from the kids who said, yes, the parents who said, yes, my kid can watch it, and then they randomize that group, is that a good sample?
No.
No, all of those kids have parents who are open-minded enough to allow them to potentially watch the film. So it's not random. It's not an experiment, okay? So all we can say is when we see, as we've seen more sex ed, we've seen more pregnancy. As we've seen more pregnancy, we've seen more sex ed. We can't say one of those things is causing the other. Just before, right after we talked about this, just as y'all were coming in and I was saying goodbye to my other class here, one of my students asked me, he said, I just heard that Trump has the absolute lowest unemployment, the highest unemployment rate in forever, okay? And he's like, is that cause and effect? So I'm gonna ask you guys, is that cause and effect?
No.
So is it a fact that we have a very high unemployment rate right now?
Yes.
Yes, highest in a long time?
Yes.
Yeah. But is it a fact that Trump caused it?
No.
Now, I'm no fan of Trump, but I can guarantee you that we don't know if Trump caused it, okay? We know that he happened to be president, and when this is happening, just like other good or bad things happen when other people are in the office. And so under them, this happened. Under this guy, this happened. You know, hopefully one day we'll say under this lady, this happened, right? Okay? But we don't know its cause and effect. So I've got some other examples for you today, and for some weird reason, okay, all my examples today have to do with breasts. These are just things that happened over the years. And then I promise we're never going to talk about breasts again. I'm not even sure I want to talk about breasts today. But I have some interesting examples that came from my own life as I was driving to work. Now maybe that's only the examples I remember, which says more about me than what's out there on the radio. But many years ago, I remember coming into work, and the disc jockeys had just read about a scientific study that said that women who wore bras were more likely to have breast cancer. And so, of course, you can imagine what the disc jockeys are saying, right? Take it off, throw it out the window, you know, because it's not good for you, it's unhealthy. Now, of course, right, that there may be some truth to that. However, they're trying to make it sound like it's cause and effect, right? Like the bra is causing you to have cancer. And the fact is that women aren't randomly assigned to wear bras their whole life or not. So another breast example. Another day, coming up here to work, I hear disc jockeys talking, and this time they're saying that lesbians, and this was in the 80s, I don't know if you know about the 80s, if you remember that far, or if you lived through the 80s, but lesbianism was like the cool thing, right? You hear me? Like everybody was, like nowadays, when I hear the little teen kids talking, they're like, oh, I'm omnisexual or pansexual or whatever. Back then it was being a lesbian. That was the thing. I don't know. I missed it. Anyway, the point of the matter is that they were talking about lesbians on the radio. And they say lesbians are more likely to have breast cancer than straight women.
What?
Okay? Now, that is absolutely true. It's not that they're lying to you. But listen, you got Google Magic now. Okay? Don't let anything get past you. Okay? So let's talk about that. Lesbians, at the time especially, I don't know if it holds true today, were more likely to have breast cancer. Okay? But the fact is, if you look into that, any woman who does not have a child is more likely to have breast cancer than a woman who does. Overall, okay? Obviously, we're controlling for things like genetics and stuff like that. But somehow, having a baby seems to protect women a little bit against breast cancer. On the other hand, guess what lesbians don't tend to get? Vaginal cancers and STDs and stuff like that. So it's not, the way they said it made it sound like, oh, God is punishing lesbians, so this is of interest, right? But it isn't. So if you're more likely to have other types of cancer if you introduce foreign objects into this special little dream space, okay? And if you don't, then you're not likely to get not as likely to get those cancers. So my sister, for example, is straight, married, never had a child. Her chances of developing breast cancer are as high as a lesbian. The third variable, it's not whether you're straight or lesbian, it's whether you've had a child. And so the third variable is more lesbians haven't had children. And so as more lesbians hadn't had children, it looked like the correlation was between lesbians and cancer. Really, it's between having children and cancer. And lesbians just happen to belong more to this group that didn't have a child. You see what I mean? Yeah.
So could they also, if they were trying to get you to draw that conclusion, could they also say that like lesbian couples are more likely to get breast cancer than women in like straight couples because there's two women versus one? But
Yeah.
you think it was because of
Right.
that.
So the question was, could they say lesbian couples are more likely to get breast cancer than straight couples? Well, yeah. I mean, I don't know the research, but I can tell you there's two women, so the chances of breast cancer just went up, just doubled in comparison to a guy and a gal. Not that, listen, the first studies on breast cancer were done in men, but men don't have as much breast tissue, so we can get breast cancer. We just don't get it as often as women. Okay, so the next one, we're going to get down and dirty on this one. Okay, I want you to just bring out your stereotypes.
Okay.
Now, I'm gonna give the guys in here, I'm gonna give you some advice. Don't say a word. Okay? There's a lot of times as a man that you will learn that that's just good advice anyway. But don't say a word. We're gonna ask the women to talk to us about this topic. So let me tell you where this came from. And I'm going to go close the door because we are going to get a little freaky. Okay, so years ago I was reading in this magazine called Maxim. Maxim is a men's magazine that's a little racy. It's kind of like, I guess, like Cosmo for women, right? I don't know. I don't read Cosmo, but Cosmo looks a little racy. They got to cover it on the shelf and stuff, right? They got to cover the tops, don't they? The front of Cosmo?
No.
Not anymore?
No,
Because that was up for a while. Long time, okay. So now we just let them show it. Okay. So Maxim is a little racy. And it had a little bitty article at the bottom of this page. It was a bunch of little articles. And one of them, just a little blurb, had a lady, a blonde lady, very voluptuous, very large breasts, wearing a tiny little yellow bikini. Why do I remember every detail? I don't know. Obviously, it got my attention. Anyway, it had a big number 5, okay? I can't remember what I had for breakfast, but I can see this woman in my mind. Okay, so 5. Right next to her, it was a big 5, you know, the number 5. And when you read it, it said 5 is the number of years they called her lady. Your lady could live longer if she has breast implants. Okay? So the idea is that if a woman gets breast implants, she lives longer. Does that mean one of those things causes the other?
No.
How do you know? Somebody give me the nitty gritty. Why do we know it's not an experiment? What didn't happen? Go back to your requirements of an experiment. What do you need?
I don't think they put random assignment and put some titties on random women
Okay.
to see if that caused.
Okay, so I'm going to paraphrase what she said because I don't want to be caught on tape saying what she said. But she said she doesn't think they randomly assigned women to get breast implants or not. That was pretty good, huh? She used a different word. Okay. Anyway, so you're right. Okay, women do not get randomly assigned to get breast implants, do you?
No.
Okay, so there's no random assignment. Okay, so there goes the whole boom. Not an experiment. Okay, so it can't be cause and effect. Now, guys, this is your turn to shut up. Okay, just be quiet. Trust me. You may want to say something. Don't say anything. Okay. All right, ladies, it's all you today. What are women like who get breast implants?
That's a dumb question.
Is it?
Yes.
Why is it a dumb question?
Because you're not defined by something that trivial.
You're not defined by something that trivial. Okay. Now, we stereotype, though, do we not?
Yes.
Natural human tendency, right? to put things in groups. It makes us better able to make sense of a very, very complex world. Okay? So what are women like who get breast implants? Savannah says they're not like anything, they're all different, basically. Okay.
The question is, why women get breast implants?
Well, that's part of it.
So you want us to be like stereotypical?
I want you to tell me what you think when you're just hanging out with your girlfriend, drinking pumpkin spice something or another. Okay? Just tell me. Don't tell me what I want to hear, and just pretend we guys aren't here and you guys are just talking to each other, and you know y'all talk some trash, okay? So get it going. What did you say?
Some women get it for show off.
For show off?
Yeah.
Okay. What
Low
else?
self-esteem.
Huh?
Low self-esteem.
Because they have low self-esteem. What else?
Because we've had 2 kids and breastfed for 4 years and now there's nothing there.
Because you had 2 kids and you breastfed for 4 years and they're looking shabby. Is that what you mean? Okay. All right, what else?
To call the attention of the man,
To get attention from men?
yeah.
Okay, what else are they like, these women?
They've got other plastic surgery. Dumb.
They've had other plastic surgeries. Okay. Like what kind of things?
Lips injection, they have like facial injection.
Facial and lip, like Botox type stuff? Is that what you mean? Okay. What else?
Some actually get everything removed and have implants, so
So-
they don't get breast cancer.
Yes, there are people who actually get mastectomies and then have a breast put in, an implant put in. Some women get what we call radical mastectomies, where they do that because they have the breast cancer gene, and so they want to avoid something that has happened to their grandmothers and their moms and their aunts and their cousins, and so they just do that. So those are by far not the majority, but yeah.
That's
Wait.
not sure thing, that it will prevent the cancer, that's not for sure. That the person who does that will get cancer as well.
Yeah, you don't know you'll get it, but if the chances are good if you have the gene. Is that what you mean?
No, what I mean is, it's not like 100% accurate that you
Oh,
won't
yes,
get it.
yes.
There's always that chance.
Usually you won't get it, but you certainly can, because you don't need a lot of breast tissue to get breast cancer. You can still get it. Okay, so now you're talking like we're having pumpkin spice. Now, ladies, we're gonna talk like you're having margaritas, okay? You with me? Up the ante now. Guys, just be quiet, man. Trust me, I'll get you right where you wanna be. I promise you. But we're gonna talk now like you're having margaritas. Now tell me, your friends, you and your friends are talking about some girls that got implants, and what are you saying now?
They get it for Playboy magazine.
For Playboy magazine? Really?
They get it to, to show off.
To look good?
To
To look like Playboy models? Because they ain't gonna get in Playboy magazine unless they've been drinking one too many margaritas, and they're thinking they're gonna, right? What else? What do they do? What do they like? What are their relationships? What do they do for a living? Tell me about these people.
Work at Hooters.
They work at Hooters. What?
For some reason, I think about like porn stars.
Porn stars. They're porn stars who work at Hooters when they're not porning on Playboy. What else? Anybody else want to add something?
They're strippers.
They're strippers. Okay, we're there, guys. You can come back on now. That's what I'm waiting for. Every class we get to strippers. Every class, you women throw each other under the bus like that. Okay? You're strippers. So basically, we have these terrible stereotypes of these women. But I want to talk about some other things about these women. Do they tend to be healthy?
No.
No?
No.
Compared to other women?
In shape.
In shape? Oh, tell me about that.
Well, I mean, if you're getting implants like that, you're more than likely already gonna have a nicer body than.
Yeah, so it's like me getting pets, right? For what?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for agreeing so much. Okay, so basically you're saying that why get
They're
breast
improving
implants?
something.
Yeah, you're improving something, and so supposedly you take care of your body. So taking care of your body means you do what?
Exercise.
Exercise, what else?
Eat healthy.
You what?
Eat healthy.
You eat healthy? Y'all are boring. There go the margaritas. Okay, so you eat healthy, and do you go to the doctor?
Yeah.
You get checkups, you get whatever you need, you maybe whatever, okay? So you're telling me these women are healthy? Huh, okay. So they're healthy. I mean, they're not unhealthy in the I'm a stripper kind of way. I get you there. But for the most part, they're healthy women. Does your doctor give you a breast implant if you've got, some sort of weird disease?
It's probably a risk. If
It's
you're
probably
over
a
certain
risk.
weight, maybe, too.
Right, maybe overweight, other things, so you probably are not going to be a good candidate. Who's paying for this thing, this breast implant?
You sugar daddy.
You should. See, guys, we don't have to say a word. It just all comes to be. Our stereotypes of women and what we think of them has nothing to do with how badly they think of each other, is what I'm trying to say. And it's harsh. They're pretty harsh. Okay, so sugar daddies. Does everybody agree? Every woman who gets the breast implant has a sugar daddy.
No, I know. They make their own money.
They make their own money. Some people make their own money working at Hooters and stripping, right? Okay. So basically, what are things that make people live longer?
Exercise, eating healthy.
Exercise and eating healthy and what?
Have good relationship,
And what?
have good relationship maybe.
Yes, healthy relationships. Going to the doctor when you're sick. Taking preventative health measures. So here's what's happening, right? So you got a group of women who got breast implants, and they tend to live longer. But so do women who happen to be healthier, right? And who happen to take care of themselves and eat right and work out and stuff like that. So maybe it has nothing to do with getting breast implants, right?
Right.
Maybe it's just the fact that women who get implants tend to be healthier and wealthier than women who don't. And hats off to Maxim magazine, because they actually said that. They didn't just leave it there. They said it's probably due to these women being wealthier and having more, and being healthier and having more assets and stuff. So let me tell you about wealth. Money is good. That's scientific from me. You got it. Okay, you can write that down. And let me tell you about poverty. Poverty is correlated with every negative thing in the world. You name it, and poverty is related to that bad thing. Everything, okay? Your level of stress, your likelihood of getting this or that disease, you name it. Your likelihood of being incarcerated, your likelihood of getting in an accident, getting run over by a bus, okay? If you're rich, does the bus go by your house?
Yes.
No. If you're rich, the bus don't go by your house. So that means you ain't getting run over by no damn bus, are you? But if you're poor, there you got it. You might get run over by a bus, okay? It ain't gonna happen if you're rich. Too rich to be around buses. All right. So basically, that's the concept that I want to give you, that when two things are related or associated or correlated, it doesn't mean one causes the other. It means they're related in some way. And sometimes it's kind of easy to see how they might be. Like ladies who have breast implants, well, these ladies are healthier and wealthier anyway. So if you took out the breast implant thing and you just looked at women, which women live longer, I bet the healthier, wealthier women would be the ones on that list. Okay? Whether you looked at implants or not. All right, so why people spend money doing science on that when they know damn well that the answer is going to be is beyond me, but they do, okay? So what we're going to do today is we're going to talk about how do you actually go about conducting a correlation. So beyond the talk about here's what correlations mean, we're going to do that. Now, I'm a little concerned about time, so I'm not sure what to do. Can I or can't I? Will I or won't I? Okay, let's try. Okay. I don't think I can make it to the whole thing, and I do not want to cut it. Okay, let's cut the recording here. I got it. Did it stop?
No,
Did it stop now?
no.
Okay, let me tell you. Did it stop now?
No.
Did it stop now?
No.
Will you stop it for me?